Welcome to Breaking Down Patriarchy. I'm Amy McPhie Allebest. Recently, I met an older woman who follows my work and is a self-described feminist, and she was very excited to talk with me about feminism. After a few minutes of chatting about women's empowerment, she said, "What do you think of all the trans issues going on right now? How are you handling them on the podcast?" So I answered, the way I'm handling them on the podcast is by listening as trans people speak for themselves. I think she was looking for a more controversial answer, but she said, "Oh, okay, I guess that makes sense." We humans do this a lot. Sometimes white people pontificate about people of color without listening to people of color. Sometimes cisgender men preach their opinions about the nature and needs of women instead of simply listening to women. And all too often, cisgender, straight people talk themselves into knots about queer folks instead of just listening to what queer folks are saying about themselves. So today I want to introduce you to a project called the Future Perfect Project. The homepage on their website says, quote, "While lawmakers are working overtime to pass laws and propose measures to limit the self-expression of queer youth in schools and communities, the Future Perfect Project is encouraging the next generation to speak their truth and sing their songs of tomorrow. Now more than ever, we need their vision of a better world." End quote. So I am so excited to welcome to the podcast today two contributors to the Future Perfect Project, Alex Masse and Frankie Gunn. Thank you so much for being here, Alex and Frankie. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
Thank you for having us. We're super excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. This is an awesome opportunity. I appreciate you having us on your show.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm wondering if we can start out by having each of you just introduce yourselves a little bit. Tell us where you're from, a little bit about your family of origin, maybe your education, and some kind of maybe fundamental things that brought you to be the person that you are today. And maybe should we go in alphabetical order and ask Alex first?
Sure. Okay. Hi, I'm Alex K. Massey. I use they, them pronouns, and I am a non-binary femme lesbian from what is colonially known as Surrey, BC. For the Americans, that is like just outside Vancouver, BC. Yeah, I first started working with the Future Perfect Project probably a couple years ago. I knew people who worked with it, and we just kind of connected there. And I've been a part of. I've had the opportunity to do like a few different projects with the Future Perfect Project, including every iteration of the podcast cohort and also the performing arts intensive that they did a couple years back. Yeah, it's always something new and exciting with the Future Perfect Project. I am tragically like about to age out of the of the age range for them, but yeah, I've been very very privileged to have the experiences I have had with them. And yeah, I've been a creative for pretty much as long as I can remember. I started as a writer and then I became a musician. And over my time as a communication major at Simon Fraser University, I've picked up a bunch of other like means of storytelling, including podcasting. So yeah, I was really excited about I'm Feeling Queer Today. And I've worked on other podcasts before that and since. And yeah, it's just a form of storytelling that I am absolutely in love with. Does that cover everything, or was there something else?
No, that's fabulous. If you want to add any more details about like what you like to write or what kind of like what are the creative niches that you feel most excited about, you could talk about that. And maybe like as you were growing up, you said you've been a creative since you were a kid, it sounds like. So what kind of things did you like doing when you were younger?
Sure. I primarily consider myself a writer and musician, and both of those art forms have kind of grown and shifted over the years as I kind of like find myself. As a writer, I primarily consider myself to be someone who does poetry and prose, though I've also really gotten into theater over the past few years. I actually have a play getting a staged reading downtown in like a week. So, yeah, that's really exciting, a little frightening, but also really exciting. And I'm also a musician. I actually make stuff under the alias Fairy Thing. And yeah, I have a lot of influences there. I started as like a kid who really liked concert band a bit too much. And now I have my own like DIY recording studio in my room. I have a bunch of synths on my wall over there. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like definitely my creative journey has been heavily shaped by my experiences as a queer and disabled individual. but I wouldn't have it any other way. And I really like telling stories about queerness and neurodivergence and all the ways that I've been made to feel different, and just kind of making them like stories of celebration and resilience, because I didn't have a lot of those when I was growing up. So yeah, that's me, Alex K. Massey, fairy thing in some places, writer, musician, communications person, and not more than slightly more than occasional podcaster.
Amazing. Thanks, Alex. That's great. Okay, how about you, Frankie?
I'm Frankie Gunn. My pronouns are also they, them. I grew up in Hudson Valley, New York, and I am still here. I have done a lot of odd jobs and weird little things. I like to think of myself as someone that does an a la carte education. I pop around to whatever I can get my hands on. I did a course on audio engineering and sound production when I was in high school. I went to cosmetology school after high school, worked in a bakery, worked on a farm, working as a gardener now. And similarly to Alex, I've been a creative my whole life. Everything from 2D and 3D visual arts to music to podcasting. The cosmetology school had me doing hair for a while. I do anything I can get my hands on, truly. One of my favorite parts about life is getting to see and be around beautiful things, and I like to think of myself as a curator of such. Um, Hence why I found myself in gardening now, and why I think storytelling like this on podcasts like I'm Feeling Queer Today are so important, because it's highlighting the beauty of the life of queer youth. And I think that that's a really, really special thing. And I feel ridiculously fortunate to have been a part of the process of uh, facilitating these stories and also helping people tell their own stories, as well as getting the chance to tell my own.
This is so random, but I can totally see you as a gardener. That sounds like something where you would be thriving.
I appreciate that. It's a fun job.
You
That
just have
is
a
one of
vibe
the
for
most
it.
diverse resumes I've ever heard of, actually. You have done like a very wide variety of jobs. That's super cool.
Yeah, I try everything.
I love it. That's so great.
That might be a generational thing, honestly. Every like young queer I know is just like, yeah, I do 8 million things. Like I'm a poet and a therapist, or like I do this and that. Like it's always like a combination of things.
I love
the
it.
the poet therapist combination, I feel like, is ridiculously common too.
That is,
You hit the nail on the
Yeah.
head with that one.
I can see that. I can see that. Poetry as therapy. Therapy
Mhm.
can be poetic. Yeah, I can see how that would have a very strong overlap in a Venn diagram.
Yeah. I once
No,
did a show with a
absolutely.
guy who was a musician and also worked in like kayaks or something. I don't know. It's really fun. The
Love it.
range.
Love it.
That's for sure.
Okay, well, let's start with a very, very broad question. Um, you two both know Celeste Lacine, and our episode last week was with Celeste. And Celeste mentioned, like, when you talk to Frankie and Alex, make sure that you ask specifically about patriarchy, because they both can talk about it so articulately. I wouldn't have put you on the spot like this, but I wondered if we can start there. I mean, the podcast is called Breaking Down Patriarchy, right? And it is this kind of broad umbrella under which all of the episodes in some way fall under that umbrella. So, yeah, I'm so curious to hear how you would describe structural patriarchy, and maybe the impact that it's had on maybe your life individually or your community, or how you've experienced the impact of patriarchy in your life.
I mean, really, how has it not impacted every
Right.
part of everyone's life? I think that's the point that I'm at, is just it's everywhere. It's pervasive. It's something that you constantly got to be unlearning and critiquing and paying attention to, because otherwise you get lost in the sauce, and that's not a good time. Um, I mean, everything from being like a young child and being taught the box that you fit in, to being a adolescent and young adult and dealing with things like sexual harassment and sexual abuse and uh, people's stupid opinions, and the fact that nowadays everybody has a voice because of the internet. So you get to see everyone's thoughts on everything all the time, and that really drills into your brain uh, the type of world that you live in. It's hard to avoid, and I think especially Alex and our generation, like we're steeped in it, and we have been since we were, I mean, I don't know, I got my first iPod when I was 12 and I had access to the internet. You start seeing some vile stuff. Um,
Yeah, there are people out there who think women shouldn't vote.
and worse, and so much worse.
Yeah, that's
Um,
kind of surface level. Just like
yeah,
you,
we're just
you
like,
open up TikTok
given.
comments and it's just like women shouldn't vote, and it's like, okay, we're
Yeah.
just doing that now.
So I think as well that patriarchy, as pervasive and awful as it is simply only a tool of colonial white supremacy, and unpacking it further is even more important because, like, yeah, I may be queer, I may have been born a woman, but I am white, and that really truly is uh, the biggest effect on my life. Like the privileges I get from that um, far outweigh every negative thing I've ever really experienced, if only in comparison to um, people in my position who just also happen to be a person of color and
Mhm.
get it tenfold, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah, like there are entire names for the different ways of patriarchal violence against women of color. Misogynoir, for example, and like the different kinds of
Exactly.
fetishization that certain like groups face and that kind of thing. I actually just wrapped up a semester at my university looking at like the ways that patriarchy and technology intersect, and that's gotten me like it was really nice because it wasn't just like a look at like various niche ways that things continue to like kind of enforce patriarchy. Everything from like bias and like AI that scans resumes. We've all heard those stories at this point. Or like, you know, the rise of deep fake technology and how that is used as a tool of revenge porn by some people. That made headlines when it was Taylor Swift, but it can also happen to ordinary people who don't have like the millions of dollars to hire like an absolutely like just stacked legal team. Yeah.
Asterisk, she's a billionaire now,
Yeah, she
She oh
is.
yeah, right, she is. Right. I have
which
feelings
makes
about
her
Taylor
part of the
Swift, but
bourgeoisie. Well, she already was, but even more so. Eat the
I
rich.
mean, she her parents were like Christmas tree farm owners or something. I don't know. Fascinating woman. Not I don't want to talk about Taylor Swift. She's kind of
No, let's move on from her.
yeah, like I don't know. It's really interesting because the patriarchy is like something that is so it truly is inescapable, as Frankie pointed out. Like you're steeped in it from a very young age. And our generation, we're introduced to like not just the ways that like people like kind of lash back against any attempt at a woman to like kind of stand up for herself, but also like the kind of ways that even the colonial capitalist system try to like, for lack of a better phrasing, defang feminism. We did like the whole history of feminism in my course earlier this semester, and like around the 90s and stuff, they just tried to like kind of absorb it into like mainstream neoliberal culture and just made it all about personal choice. They call it choice feminism or lean in feminism. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here because this is a Breaking Down Patriarchy podcast, but like yeah, I feel like the patriarchy it goes deeper than I feel like a lot of people, even people who like spend their lives looking at it, really understand. Like I'll be talking to someone and they'll be complaining about like this trend that they saw on TikTok or someone posting a hot take that they don't agree with and they can't quite verbalize why. And I'm like, you were literally talking about like hegemonic gender roles and how people who don't follow them are more or less kind of treated as like pariahs. That's actually a term I learned this semester. Pariah femininities, kind of the way that like femme people and women are punished for not conforming to hegemonic femininity. It goes so deep and I could just talk for hours about it. But yeah, as a non-binary person, as a non-binary lesbian, uh I I feel like the patriarchy has played such a huge role in helping me discover myself because it constantly has made me feel incredibly alienated. Like I
I could not
just
agree more with
I
that
can't
statement.
connect with womanhood because of how it is. And honestly, I feel like I still wouldn't connect with womanhood even in like this ideal world where the patriarchy is over, but like it would have taken me a lot longer to realize that I was dysphoric and like didn't am not a woman. In this world, it's like, okay, yeah, this sucks
Hmm.
because like there's dysphoria, there's oppression, there's just like this hegemonic norm that's so heavily pressed upon people, and like being a lesbian alone is isolating. Being trans on top of that is just like you are constantly punished. You are like othered just time and time and time again. And again, maybe in an ideal world, it wouldn't be like this uncomfortable. Maybe in a world where patriarchy wasn't as deep as it was, I wouldn't like feel the way that I do. But also, who's to play with the what ifs? Maybe if I wasn't autistic, I wouldn't be trans, because there's a correlation there. The what ifs can go on forever. The point is that the patriarchy has a huge role in, I think, a lot of queer people's journeys, because the way that we are like often exiled from the world because of because of how we present ourselves and our desires and our genders, it's painful. It's a very quick means of realizing that you're different, but it hurts.
And it's so interesting because, like, I myself am gender nonconforming transmasculine. Um, Other people know that there's something going on with you long before you do,
Mm-hmm.
and they can pinpoint it, and you don't even know, and you don't realize till you're, 10 years down the line. Um,
And
I
by
I
that point,
have
they've
the
cut you out of everything.
yeah, exactly. I have the really interesting experience of I'm on testosterone. I've been medically transitioning for almost a year now. Um,
Woo!
I thank you. I am starting to pass more as male, even though that has never been the goal.
Mm-hmm.
And it is really so baffling seeing how people really truly do treat me differently. Not even like 4 years ago, I was still out as non-binary, gender non-conforming trans mask, but I presented a very different way. I had like shoulder length hair. I was in cosmetology school doing lots of makeup, goofing off, having a good time. And I liked the way that I presented then, and then it didn't work for me, and I switched it up. And I get listened to so much more. It's ridiculous. I work at a place where all my coworkers are cis men, and I am very critically aware that the way that I present myself at my job is, in good part, the way that I'm taken seriously, the way that my opinions are listened to, the way my words are heard. The pitch of my voice can determine whether or not someone's going to take my questions seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And that being said, there's, another queer guy at my work, but he still is a cis man. And it's just really interesting having gone from one end of the spectrum to the other. I have played with my presentation and my experience of the world quite a lot. And for anyone who could possibly deny that there's a difference in the way that you present yourself, whether or not you're seen as more masculine or more feminine, are just in denial, because I have experienced it firsthand, and it is a stark contrast.
Yeah,
That's
it's a
really
story that I feel a lot of transmasculine people have. It's like even phone calls, like once your voice hits a certain pitch and they stop mamming you all the time and they suddenly take you way more seriously.
valid. That's really tricky. This is reminding me of a podcast episode that we did, like probably in season 1, really early on, and the debate between, so as a cisgender woman, um, that choice of whether to, knowing that that's true, and it's incredibly validating to hear it from someone who has experienced both.
Mm-hmm.
But like me making the choice, I naturally have on the higher end of a voice pitch, and making the choice of whether I should lower my voice in order to be taken seriously, or whether I should keep it as it is naturally and then demand that people do take me seriously, so that we at least do a little bit to retrain the world to take voices that are higher pitched more seriously, or feminine voices.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same with dress, right? If you think, like, I was talking with a woman who, I think it was Marissa Mayer at Yahoo. She was like the CEO of Yahoo for a little while, and she wore pink frilly dresses to work instead of dark suits, because she's like, yeah, you're going to have to get used to this feminine presenting person in a position of power, which is again, it's like a brave choice, because women, or cisgender women, have, in order to be taken seriously, in order to like have people be able to picture them in a position of leadership, they have to present in a certain way. So it's a tricky choice to make, I guess.
That's something that came up a lot when I was talking about 90s choice feminism, actually, in my lecture.
Mm.
Just like the idea that, yeah, women don't have, it's pretty much just like this kind of almost degendering of women. It's like women can be boss, women can wear pants in relationship, and it's like we're not fixing anything. We're just like we're making women like we're punishing them for being feminine. That's still a problem. Even if, yeah, woman CEO, woman in pantsuit. What great. Like, I don't know. There's something about it that's just so irritating. It's just this
Mhm.
idea that like, yeah, a woman can be more masculine, and it's just kind of equating like masculinity and power together. And it's just kind
Indeed.
of it keeps putting femininity in this box of like, yeah, girls can be frilly, but frilly and like powerful are not ever in the same sentence. Like
Mhm.
the fact that that's still an issue, like the fact that, you know, like, yeah, the fact that how we present it is how we're taken seriously, like across the gender spectrum. It's, and it always comes down to femininity being punished, whatever gender you are. Like that's again the pariah femininities and feminine masculinities. Like just this idea that like, yeah, once, no, it's not feminine masculinities, it's masculine femininities, because like if you're feminine, whether you're like a man or a woman, that's punished. It's used to like keep you in a hegemonic gender role if you are a woman, and if you're a man, then it's just used to dismiss you, and like, you know, all the homophobic nonsense goes on top of that, and often a lot of colonial nonsense goes on top of that, because these ideas of hegemonic gender roles are, as stated, placed in like colonial white supremacy. It's just, yeah, femininity is punished in both binary genders. And once people like Frankie and I show up, it gets even worse, because like then there's just so much more to interrogate. Like trans people coming into the equation, it's just even more complicated. But yeah, like,
Well, it
yeah.
becomes so much more nuanced and therefore creates the opportunity to just do so much deeper thinking. And
Hmm.
when you're stuck in that box already, it's really hard to get your foot on the outside, let alone your whole body. And when you know, have been subscribing to what's been on your birth certificate since you've been a infant without questioning it, it's really hard to see other people who have questioned it and made their own decisions and found their own truth and not have a little bit of a brain break.
Yeah, I think that it like a lot of people just go through their lives never having questioned their genders. And, you know, sometimes that's almost enviable. It's like, wow, you never had an era where like you were completely breaking down because you hated what puberty was doing to your body. Sheesh, wish that was me. Can't relate to you, unfortunately. I I I threaten certain parts of my body with like straight up eviction. Like if my chest gets bigger, I'm cutting it off. If this changes, I'm losing my mind. If this changes, then I'm gonna change this. Like, yeah, it's just, and again, there are so many factors that come into that, obviously. Like, I don't know. I don't try to waste time bothering with like the whys and stuff, but like the fact that there are people who have never had to question the nuances of their presentation in that patriarchal context. Like, it's enviable.
Mm. Yeah, it's something to, yeah, I mean, I'm probably the generation of your parents. Um, and it's like it is a complete mind shift. And I think in a really, really valuable way, even for someone who like is cisgender, but like you're saying, like to hold a mirror up or to like make people confront the not just the biases, like not just the unkind biases and bigotry, but the actual foundations of everything the world is built
Mhm.
on. Um, and I was thinking the other day about I've talked before about reform feminism versus radical feminism, and how radical just means from the root, right?
Mhm.
To radical means root. So a radical feminist, it isn't necessarily that they're militant or violent, but it just means they want to pull something up from the very foundation, get rid of it, and then start again. And I was thinking, oh, then, I mean, you can tell me if you agree or disagree, but I was like, oh, then, I mean, a trans person would be the most radical because it want like that. The notion of that is digging under the foundations and saying, no, 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 no. It goes even deeper than that. We're going to get rid of everything with no pressure and see what like each individual human being, what they're feeling and is and what their expression is, and have it be open land with no preconceived notions at all. So anyway, does that check out in terms of,
Oh,
does that map with your kind of mentality about it?
absolutely. I mean, the questioning your gender and messing with your gender expression is not just for trans people. It's not just
Absolutely
for queer
not.
people either. It is for literally everyone. Like, you can be as cis as anyone else and, I don't know, hang out in the bathroom, look in the mirror, throw on like a fake little mustache and put your hair up all short and just be like, what if?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's fun. You can play with it. That's the wonderful thing, I think, about gender in general. And this is something that one of our peers on the podcast, Ariella, has talked about quite a bit, that trans joy and trans play is like infectious and is for everyone. Like playing with your expression and your presentation and even like the lens through which you see yourself, whether or not you're cisgender, trans, or any range of sexualities, is like, it's actually a really important step to just simply understanding yourself, even if you come back around to where you started and just end up being like, yeah, I feel exactly like, what the doctors indicated on my birth certificate.
Hmm.
That's great. You know yourself better. It's something I really wish for cis people is that they experience the gender euphoria that trans people get through that journey of self-expression and curiosity, because it feels real good once you figure that stuff out. And the only way that you can do that is by being critical and looking at things through a magnifying glass and having fun. Like, the most important thing is that, like, gender can be really, really fun. And there's so much emphasis on dysphoria and like, well, you shouldn't be able to medically transition unless you have a certain level of dysphoria. And if you don't have this, then you're not trans. And if it's really
Yeah, the
silly because
phenomenon
like,
of quantifying transness just kind of like it makes my skin crawl because like when you're going to quantifying, you're going to medicalizing and pathologizing, and again, it becomes that question of why someone is trans, and like it becomes a question of like how do we cure it almost, and that's just
exactly, like,
like
how
the
do you treat it
concept. It's like we
in
didn't learn
reality
anything from conversion therapy, really. Like,
exactly, like, what we're all looking for is just to feel content and like
mm,
at home in our bodies, and like that should be the goal for everyone, not just trans people. Like, I know I've known cis women that experience gender dysphoria who are solidly cis women,
mhm.
but because of the way that our culture is structured, like, they're told that certain parts of them are incorrect and
Yeah.
wrong,
Gender
when in
dysphoria
reality
is so common in cis women.
it
They just
is
don't know to
like,
call
it's
it that. Like they look at their arm hair and they're like, "Oh, I look like a man. I need to shave before I
that's
go
gender
out." Like,
dysphoria.
yeah,
And it's
I don't know.
enforced by the structures in place.
Yeah, I find though that being able to experiment and play with your gender, even if you come out the other end and you're like, "Yep, I'm cis." It's just it's it's an exercise in not only play but also empathy, you know? Like this is something that I find a lot of trans people they had no choice but to do. Like I had no choice but to like experiment with like different like forms of expression and forms of like identification and like labels and pronouns because I was just like scrambling for something that fit. And I think that like being able to just kind of look at the various routes that people go down to just try and make their bodies and their minds and like the way the kind of energy that they project out to the world feel like home. It's like it really is eye-opening and I think it really is like empathy building and you might discover something about yourself, you might not. I mean, hey, if you're listening to this podcast and you realize like, oh, that time that I was worried that like insert trait about me made me look like the opposite binary gender was gender dysphoria, was that was gender dysphoria, like I find that even just that is kind of like almost empathy building, like
Mhm.
just realizing that we are not some alien species who like is the product of a neurochemical con job or something that made us want to put hormones in us. Like, it's something that a lot of people across the gender spectrum can be like pushed into. And it's the patriarchy, it's white supremacy, it's all these things that are just like crushing all of us. And yeah, no matter, I don't think that like trans people want a world without gender. We want a world where gender is expansive. We want a world where it's not, there's no options. We want a world where there's all the options. Like you
Mm.
can have a gender in this hypothetical genderless utopia. That's like, it's not like a, oh, you have a gender, we're gonna like run you over with a bus. Does anyone else remember that old post that was like, I got like chased by a bus full of transgender people chanting like down with cis or something? Like that's how people
Yeah.
like seem to think that a lot of trans people view the world. But like we a lot of trans people have genders actually. Like
Mhm.
it's not like we want a world without gender. We want a
No,
world where
indeed.
there's choice and there's freedom to explore and play and yeah.
Thank you
I
for
just
that.
have to
That's
butt in and
please.
say, Alex, I think you have just said my new favorite phrase, which is neurochemical con job. I'm
I
obsessed with that.
I
Thank
heard it
you.
in an internet meme
Putting that in
several
my
years ago.
vocabulary.
I heard it in an internet meme calling love a neurochemical con job. Might have been from like
That's
a young
so
adult book or
funny.
something originally. I don't know. It's
Love
just
it.
I don't think that transness is just like some brain chemistry that's all wonky. I think that it's like a natural phenomenon that has always existed.
Yeah.
Like open a history,
Exactly.
well, maybe not a history book. They love erasing us, but like go to like oral histories, recordings, that kind of thing. Like
Yeah.
it's everywhere.
So
We're everywhere.
I have a question. If there's this is so helpful for me to deepen my understanding too. What would be your maybe advice for someone who is going through the like a phase of like exploration and play and like, oh, getting to know myself, and maybe that phase, maybe it's not like a phase that then ends and then forever. Maybe it's just kind of dynamic through a person's life. And I guess if it is dynamic through a person's life, at what point would you say like, okay, then this would be a wise um, like a wise time to start hormone therapy or do like a surgery or something? Because I know those are kind of the where the rubber meets the road, and kind of like, I know it's a hot button topic like politically, but practically speaking, in your own lived experience, because it is a lot easier, right? And less expensive and less of a big deal to play with cosmetics and clothes and hair and stuff that you can try on, like you said, like draw a mustache on yourself in the bathroom and like just see how it feels. So at what point would be wise in your view to say, okay, I think I've settled on what this is going to be for, and then how much of a period of time makes it worth it to like invest money and time and potentially painful things to commit to something?
I can certainly speak on this a little bit because I am going through a medical transition.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I personally have been out as trans since I was, I think, like 16. I first came out as agender non-binary. Um, and even after I came out as trans masc, not long after that, it took me until when I was 23 last year to medically transition.
Okay.
I think the timeline is different for absolutely everyone. I've had dysphoria for my entire adolescent life, and just because I didn't choose to transition earlier didn't mean it was easier. It means that I had many a mental roadblock to get over, and I am an overthinker. I like to overplan. I like to think through every possible outcome. It is both a strength and a flaw of mine. I think it comes in super handy and gets in the way all the time. Um, and for me, it got to the point where it was just inevitable. I was running from it, and I just had to take the next step. I think for some people, they know inherently that they're once they have access to the information that there is the possibility of things like hormone replacement therapy or puberty blockers or the various surgeries that you can get to have your gender affirmed physically. Sometimes it's very obvious, and sometimes you do need the time to think, and both are fine. There is no when this happens, that means that it's time. That never happens.
Mm-hmm.
For anyone that I've ever talked to, as many epiphanies as trans people have, as many aha moments that we go through, it's never obvious. Uh, it's also hard to make the choice to do it, especially when there is pressure not to. Oftentimes, from our culture at large, and sometimes trickling down into friends and family or teachers or peers. It can be really hard when you're younger because you are told from a young age as a child that you don't have the same rights as adults, that you don't have the same autonomy, that your thoughts and opinions don't hold as much value because you haven't experienced the world yet. I know I encountered that a lot as a young person, that my anxieties weren't real, my sadnesses weren't real, my uh, lack of ability to find a home in myself wasn't real because I hadn't lived enough yet.
It'll just
When
go away, is what they love to tell us.
Yeah, and just on the note of people going through phases, I think everyone goes through phases in every aspect of life. There's no going through a phase has become a really significantly looked down upon thing, which I find really interesting because I am not the same as I was when I was a teenager, and I am not the same as I will be when I'm 30, when I'm 40, when I'm 50. As
And
humans,
thank
we change.
goodness.
No, truly, we learn and grow, and if you allow yourself to be challenged and put in potentially uncomfortable situations, you have the opportunity to become a million iterations of yourself. And that's one of the beautiful things about life, is constantly changing. And so I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that you identify one way at one point in your life, another way in your next season, and following that something different. I think that humans are really fluid creatures. And going back to colonial white supremacy, telling human beings that they can't change, that they have to stay rigid and stoic, is just another form of control. It is just another way to put you in a box and make you feel like you don't have the power that you have.
Thanks, Frankie. Yeah, that helps me understand more deeply. Thank you so much.
If I
Okay.
can just add, there's also that statistic that's more people regret knee surgery than any kind of gender transitional procedure, I think it was. I heard the study a while ago. I can probably send you the source. You can put it in the podcast notes. That's what we usually do at the podcasts I've worked on. But yeah, there is no point where it's okay, every trans person knows that this is what they need. I mean, I'm a trans person who hasn't really ever wanted or needed any kind of gender affirming physical care. I find myself very fortunate that I just have some natural androgyny going on, and it's been at a point where it's if something changes, I might consider that. Like I said, if for some reason in my mid-20s my chest gets bigger, I might look into that. But I don't know. Maybe I won't. Maybe I'll be yeah, I'm still non-binary and I can live with this. But also if I'm saying I can live with this, that probably means I don't want to. Yeah, though, I don't know. There isn't a single answer. It's just a matter of let yourself feel what you feel, follow those feelings, and who knows?
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, let's start talking about the Future Perfect project that you both work on, and then the podcast, which is called I'm Feeling Queer Today. So maybe you can take turns kind of telling me what it is, why there's a need for it, and then tell me about some of the projects that go on there.
Okay,
Either
well,
one of you can start.
Want to take it?
Sure.
That you've spent a little bit more time with the Future Perfect project than I have.
A little bit more, only a little bit. The Future Perfect Project is basically this organization that goes out there and connects with queer youth and gives them means of expressing themselves, more or less, across creative mediums. There's the podcast cohort, I'm Feeling Queer Today. I also was part of a performing arts intensive where we learned about performance and musical theater and that kind of thing. There's also been writing workshops and animation workshops. It just kind of acts as the sort of haven for letting young queer people get the opportunity to not just explore storytelling but also get concrete results. So I really feel it manages to strike this really nice balance between being able to provide personal and also kind of professional resources for young queer storytellers, which I think is really important because a lot of us struggle in either one or both of those spaces. Some of us have stories we want to tell but have no idea how to get it out there. Some people struggle to like figure out how to tell those stories in the first place. And the Future Perfect Project has just been this really wonderful space that allows people to do that. They also have like Future Perfect Records for like young queer musicians. It's just there are so many options and opportunities, and it's just such a it's an exciting, far-reaching organization run by wonderful people who are doing what I find to be a really wonderful thing, especially with like the current political climate, particularly in the US, but it's not exactly all sunshine and roses up here in Canada either. So,
No, and I think touching on like why there's a need for the Perfect Project, Alex, you just briefly skimmed it, is the legislation that's going into place, like
mhm,
not only in the US where I'm from, but truly all over the world. Like it's the one set of voices that's really missing in the conversation that is primarily being had by adults is the youth that are being impacted the most. And I feel like the Future Perfect Project as like a media production company is really important because it does allow for queer youth to get their own voices out there, to have the conversations that need to be had. I know working on this podcast in particular, on I'm Feeling Queer Today, um, I got the opportunity to have some conversations that I've never quite had before and would have a really hard time having with even the older generation of queer people, let alone cis people that are putting these laws into place. Um, I think there's so much talk of like, well, what if these kids do that? And what if it impacts that way? And what if their parents do that? And what if the doctors do that? And there's so, there's nothing really super concrete about those statements that are being made because they're not coming from the people that have the experiences of being young and queer and trans in particular. Um, and that's why the Future Perfect Project needs to exist. That's why I think more media companies like this should exist, where the focus is on getting young people not only the opportunity, but just the platform to run free and to tell their stories and to speak their truth. Um, because, like, there's nothing like hearing someone who's close to your age that looks or presents or expresses themselves like you, telling a story that mirrors your own life. Uh, I mean, I'm the oldest person in this cohort, and still, when I was an adolescent, I'm 24. When I was an adolescent, um, there weren't stories of young trans people, and it was hard to see myself in adult trans people because I didn't know what that was like. I do now.
mhm.
Now I can relate. Now it's pretty cool being able to see people my age and older tell their stories and live their lives. But at the time, I felt so alone and so isolated because I thought I was too young to be having these problems. And I say problems because that's how I viewed them at the time, not because that they are problems.
Mhm.
Um,
When you don't have
and
the verbiage for it, it does kind of feel like a problem because
Mhm.
like I didn't know that what I was feeling was dysphoria until I was like well into my teens. And like yeah, just being able to be in a space where young people can like talk about these experiences. I think that if I'd had that younger, I would have like figured myself out much younger. And I also think that again, I'm just coming back to like this concept of empathy. Like it's important for like young queer people to have those stories being told, but I also feel like it's just like it's empathy building for like sometimes the parents and guardians of those young people. Like being able to be like, "Oh, okay, there's someone like my kid out there." This I just find that really important. Like I do still think that
I
like
agree.
the queer people benefit from it probably on a totally different level because like it's just that feeling of not being alone and realizing that like this is an experience that isn't like some like problem. It isn't a problem. It's something that can be beautiful and celebrated and I get, but there's also just the logistic thing of like being able to like walk up to your parents if it's safe and be like, here's someone like me. Like
Yeah.
it also just kind of acts as like hope for every party involved. Like, okay, there is a way to be trans and happy. Because I feel like that's something that even now is still kind of inherently radical. in a world where so many of our
Yeah.
stories are just defined by like, I hate my body. I'm gonna bind unsafely with duct tape because I hate my body. Like, I think it's really important to have trans people who are happy, who don't like, well, if they are binding, bind safely, I hope. Please bind safely, folks. My
Please
goodness.
bind safely.
My goodness. But like people who are able to like express themselves and find happiness, whether it's like through gender affirming care or embracing their trans bodies and like their means of presentation. Like there are just so many ways to be trans and happy, I guess. And queer, I guess is what I'm saying. And queer and happy. Like,
Yeah, I feel like you and I keep coming back to being trans because that is the experience that we have, but all of this applies to being queer as well.
mhm.
And the whole project, the Future Perfect project, including the podcast I'm Feeling Queer Today, is for the whole right, like the
Yeah, it's for the spectrum of
LGBTQIA
people, and
plus for
I
everybody. Yeah.
absolutely, there's a whole slew of different kinds of people on the podcast that talk about their experiences, and you know, I just want to point out again, like Alex and my experience is limited to being like white AFAB
Yep.
non-binary people,
Mm-hmm.
and that is a very 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 slim portion of the entire community, and so we can only represent our experiences through that lens and not other people's. That being said, if you do want to hear about many more experiences, there are so many stories on this podcast that are just waiting to be listened to.
That's so
Yeah,
exciting.
there's this one kind of like guideline that we went by in the series. And I think that this is like Future Perfect project wide. It's like this concept of speak from the I, which is like kind of acknowledging that your perspectives aren't universal. Like there are probably people on the podcast who if I like sat down and tried to talk about labels with them, it'd be like the way that we like approach the same label could be like straight up contradictory or almost opposite. And that's totally fine. That's really cool in fact. Like there are just so many different ways to experience things. I mean, even looking at like Frankie and I, who are both like white AFAB people, we have like radically different experiences. So just imagine like the full spectrum of like lived experiences of young queer people. There's just so much range, and I find that really exciting. And that's one of the really cool things about this podcast. We have people from all kinds of backgrounds who like identify themselves in all kinds of ways. Some just don't really label themselves at all, and that's amazing.
Okay, so tell me about some of the details of how it works. So you mentioned, Frankie, that you were part of a specific cohort. So what's a cohort, first of all? Like, what does that mean exactly? And then I'd love you to tell me, like, yeah, kind of the details of the podcast, how it works. How do you determine, like, who's the host of each episode? And what are you discussing? And do you seek guests on topics that you want to cover for the podcast, or do people come to you? What's your listenership like? So I'd love to just know some more
Yeah.
details about how everything works. And I just shot like 5 questions at you. Sorry.
So to start off with just like the cohort question, what I
Yeah.
mean by cohort is just in this season of the podcast, the group
Oh, I
of
got it.
people that have been working on it. In the second season, it is also the same group of people because we had so much media that we split it up into 2 seasons, and that's going to be coming out in September. But the very first cohort was the first kind of trial run episode that Alex was a part of. I only joined for the first season, but the second cohort. So that's kind of just all I meant was like in this group of people. In terms of how we decide hosts and topics and things of the sort, everyone kind of had free reign to make the segments that they wanted to make and talk about the topics that were important to them. And when there was crossover, people met up and had roundtable discussions or found folks outside of the podcast to interview. I mean, I know quite a few of the segments I created were just putting an open call out to everyone in the group that we were working in. Here's a couple questions I have. Who wants to answer them? And then I would take all the audio I received from them and splice it into a segment that I thought was meaningful and important. People had different ways of going about it. And Alex, you've referred to this podcast many a time as an audio zine.
I made a whole
zine,
segment about
excuse
it.
me, an audio zine, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, if you want to hear about that, it's on the podcast.
Love
But
it.
I think that that's a really beautiful sentiment because that's truly what it is. Like, we just made this giant collage of people talking and telling their stories with like no rhyme or reason that turned into this like really, really beautiful uh, piece of art, truly.
Mhm.
And in terms of choosing hosts, I think it was just whoever wanted to do it could do it. I think there were some last minute scrambles, there was some early decisions that stuck, and we just kind of made it all work.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
like the cohort is the group of youth that created like a vast majority of the content that you hear. Like I think that some people like went outside of the cohort to like interview people in their own lives and stuff. Like there was one segment with like an interview of like a local activist, I think it was. And then there are other segments that are like I don't remember if this made it into the full cut because I haven't listened to the first season in a while, but I remember there was talk about like a like queer death care or something and queer memorials and stuff. Like it's all over the place. We
Yeah.
basically just were like, here's a platform to tell your stories. Here's a little bit about like audio storytelling and workshopping and interviewing. Go be free, have fun.
Wow. Okay, how are you funded then? Like, who pays for the any equipment that you need? Is
We
it
were lucky enough to
donation?
be supplied an app that does a really, really good job making your phone's audio quality superb.
Amazing.
And we were all given the instructions on how to use it. And like Alex said, we were given a workshop on how to interview and all that stuff, how to hold the phone correctly and whatnot to pick up the best audio. And that was our equipment. We recorded on iPhones for the most
Love
part.
it.
I know there are some segments that are just Zoom audio quality that just got enhanced. Um, it really was like a very DIY project. Uh, any
But that
funding that needed to be
accessibility
done,
is like part of
yeah,
what made it like possible to be made in the first place because
Mhm.
like the Future Perfect Project is it's not the kind of organization that can afford to fly us all in to like a studio or something
Yeah.
like like I'm feeling queer today. It's a little scrappy. It's a little DIY, and that's part of what I think reminded it of zines. Like,
Mhm.
actually, not to be like, I took a university course, but I took a university course about like social texts and like social change. And zines and podcasts are both kind of like similar in that they are accessible means of like distributing information and ideas. Like
Mhm.
the podcast in general could arguably be considered an audio zine. We just kind of took that to the next level. We got a bunch of queer youth together, talked about what we would want a podcast to be, and we just went off and made it.
Hmm. Love it. Well, I can relate. That's how I've done mine too. My only costs have been like the books that I buy. All
Mm-hmm.
my guests are volunteers, and I just record on my laptop. But Sam, I don't know if you know Sam Preminger personally, but that's who made this connection. I guess it was Sam to Celeste to the two of you. But Sam is a fabulous editor. So I guess I do have that cost of paying a professional editor. And Sam does a fantastic job.
and
But
also
yeah.
I do just want to say huge, huge thanks to both Celeste and
Mm-hmm.
Celeste Lacine and Julie Novak. They both seriously like pulled together this whole thing. Anything that we weren't capable of doing, they just took on. I know I was doing a lot of the editing until I got this job as a gardener that took up my whole life, and Julie took over and did the vast majority of all the final cuts that we had all talked about when we were in
Mm-hmm.
production meetings. Um, and so, like, truly, this would not have come together in its entirety without the two of them. And so, they deserve their flowers. They did an
Absolutely.
incredible job facilitating this whole thing for us. And I couldn't be more grateful for the two mentors that we had.
Yeah, like it's one thing to like tell a bunch of like queer youth, hey, go make your little projects. It's another thing to be able to stitch it all together into something presentable and publishable, which is what they ended up
Mhm.
doing. I'm
And
like amazed that
yeah,
that happened how it did.
that's wonderful. Yeah. Yeah, Celeste just seems like the most wonderful human being. And
Mm-hmm.
okay, and Julie also. That's fantastic. Okay, so on that topic, and we have like maybe time for two more questions. That was one of the things I wanted to ask you is I think you referred to this a little bit earlier, Frankie, about just the generational differences, even in the queer community, between younger kind of Gen Z And then older generations, millennials and Gen X, and even older than that. And I guess the way I'll phrase the question is just, can you talk about a little bit of like the contribution that the older generation has made that you felt in your life, and then what you think the contribution is of the younger generation?
The reason that I can be out and proud the way that I am, the way that I can present, the way that I have access to medical care that I need, is because of my queer elders. I stand on their shoulders and I thank them for everything that they've done. Um, so much work has been put into queer and trans liberation that was long before I was ever alive, long before I was ever a conscious human adult. And without that, I would not have the opportunity or access that I do. What haven't they done, really,
Yeah.
truly? Obviously, there are differences between our generation of queer folks and older generations, in part due to technology and smartphones, and just access to information. But I think even the people that have not caught up yet, because no, not everybody needs to. And by caught up yet, I mean vocabulary and lingo and newer concepts that are being uh, more widely spread nowadays. Um,
Because it's safe to.
yeah, and the only reason that it is safe to is because of the people that have come before us that have worked
Mm-hmm.
so hard to make this world a safer, more sane place for us. We're the youth. We're what they've been working so hard for, and it is only fair that we pick up the torch and continue for people younger than us, because progress is only made uh, slowly. It's not a fast process. It is intergenerational. And in terms of what youth contribute, I mean, again, what don't we're all working together, just from different angles. I feel like young people are here for vitality and new ideas and problem solving, and again, telling their experience and expanding vocabulary and concepts and adding more nuance to the world and more beauty. And I think without both sides, without the respect needed to be given to our elders and respect to the youth who are trying their damn hardest in this really, really difficult world, um, you just lack a full picture. There would be no queer community without either.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful.
Yeah. No generation exists in a vacuum. And that's a beautiful thing. Like, I just find that really wonderful that that we're able to look back, that we have the privilege to be able to look back on even like some queer history, because God knows that they try to erase it, but it's there.
And
And
unfortunately succeeded in a lot of ways.
yeah, but it's still there, both in like actual recorded history and in like the fact that we are, as Frankie said, allowed to be safer than they were. Like, I think that queer people are a group that are immensely conscious that like the way of like how things change and so on. I think that it's because of how like people, we have to seek each other out and we have to seek that community out. So a lot of that does come with this active awareness of like the safety or lack thereof, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I find that a lot of queer people, unfortunately, it takes a while for them to meet another queer person or even be introduced to the concept of queerness. And the fact that, like, we have to seek that out often means I feel that we are very conscious of how things change over generations and stuff. And, like, maybe in this generation, it's a bit easier for us to find that information in that community, but I hope that that's not at the cost of realizing what came before and our ability to like respect and acknowledge that.
Wonderful. Okay, last question. And it has two parts, and you can answer either one first. Just thinking about people who are listening to this or watching right now, I'm thinking of kind of two different communities. So, what would you say to any listeners or viewers who are queer and aren't out yet? What would you say to them? And then the other community that I'm picturing listening or watching, is maybe cisgender heterosexual people who are in the beginning stages of allyship, who are listening and like maybe dipping their toes in. They want to be good, kind people, but maybe they're unsure how and they're feeling new. So what would be kind of your advice or your hopes for each of those groups of people?
Do we want to do the first group and then the next group, Frankie, kind of back to back?
Yeah, sounds
Okay,
good.
you can start.
All right. Well, to folks listening that aren't out yet, that are in the process of doing their questioning on the beginning of their journey, I think the most important thing is that you don't rush. You figure it out in the time that it takes. The first person you ever come out to is yourself, and that is a really, really difficult process. And if you're not ready to do that, if you have an inkling but you're not ready to admit that yet to yourself or to other people, that's okay. If you're not safe, if it's because you're unsure, if it's because it's confusing as hell, that's great. That's part of the journey. And eventually, at some point in your life, I hope you look back and appreciate the care and kindness that you've given yourself to take the time that you need. Um, and you just you just got to be nice to yourself. You just got to be kind and forgiving because it's hard, especially when we live in a scary, scary world.
Yeah, just being able to find like joy and play where it's safe and where you can go a long way. And it's okay if like you don't immediately find your answer. Lord knows that a lot of us didn't. Like Frankie said, the first person you come out to is yourself. And even that can be terrifying. And that's okay. It's okay to feel however you're feeling. The experience of being like a queer or trans person, it's complex and it has like there are multitudes to it. There's joy, there's sometimes sorrow, and whatever you're feeling is okay. And it's okay to just like let yourself feel those feelings. And yeah, just play and joy where you can, where it's safe, and you're not alone. That's a promise. Sometimes it feels like you're the first person to ever feel that kind of pain, but you're not. A lot of us have felt that, but there is a beautiful community out there, and it's always been there, and it always will be there, no matter what anyone tries to do about it. And if you discover that you're a part of it, you will be welcomed with open arms.
Then before we go into the next part of the question, actually, would you share the resources that are available through the organizations that you work with? And then if you have any other organizations that you would recommend to find that solidarity and community?
Yeah, one resource that we continuously come back to and shout out, partially because of Celeste's connection to it, aka co-founding it, is the Trevor Project, which is for people between the ages of 13 to 24 and is LGBTQIA plus specific support. You can text or chat, and the number is 1-866-488-7386. That is 1-866-488-7386. The Future Perfect Project is available at thefutureperfectproject.org, and it has links to our podcast and other media projects and our social media, and also information about workshops and internships for queer youth.
Amazing. And then I'm feeling queer today. What platforms can we find that on?
Anywhere that you can find podcasts.
Sweet. Love it. Okay, wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. So back to kind of the other question that I asked, how about people who are wanting to be allies and maybe are feeling either intimidated or they're nervous to ask questions? What advice would you give to them, or what are your hopes for them?
I understand the hesitation to ask questions. I would say ask away as long as you're approaching it with respect and you're not being invasive and you're not demanding education from queer people. If you are coming from a place of compassion and empathy and a willingness to learn and be open, questions are great. Don't expect queer people to just answer them for you. I know when I'm having a bad day, the last thing I want to do is launch into an explanation that I've given 1,000 times. But if you know queer people, if there's a comment section on the internet that you're comfortable in and you just want to you want to know something, it's worth asking. There's also literature that can be found. There are articles on the internet. Google is a really great place to ask questions. Sometimes it is worth throwing in a Google search before asking a queer person, but there is also a lot of nuance lost in that. And therefore, I think both resources are incredibly important. Again, there is literature to be found at the moment. Not a single thing is popping to mind because I'm a little bit tired. It's been a long day, but it is out there.
Yeah, and on top of that, you might find some answers are contradictory to answers you've heard before, and that is okay. Like, they're like, if you know one trans person, you only know one trans person. That's a thing that a lot of people say about a lot of other things. We are not a monolith. Some of us, might be more open to answering questions. Some of us might have gotten tired of answering the same questions a million times. And some of us might even be like skeptical of well-meaning allies because some people have been burned in the past. And that's a sad truth, but it is a truth. And I don't know, once again, I'm just coming back to empathy and like just having empathy and kind of keeping in mind that being trans is kind of stressful right now. So
Being queer
like
in general
being
is
queer in
really
general
stressful.
is like really stressful right
It's
now. Like both sides of
it's
the
hard.
border, we're not having a great time. Not even to mention like outside of the US and Canada, we're not having a blast. Um but yeah, just like trans people aren't a monolith. You might get the same question answered different ways by different people. You might have people who are more open to answering your questions and more people and others who are less into answering your questions. There's like no simple perfect way to be an ally who doesn't mess up, but I feel like if your heart is in the right place and you're committed to like helping queer and trans people, then I don't know, I feel like that says a lot and that speaks volumes, and that's unfortunately more than a lot of people will be doing because a
Yeah.
lot of people just kind of like to pretend we don't exist. So we appreciate it even if sometimes we don't have the capacity to hold your hand, for lack of a better phrasing. We
Mhm.
appreciate the intentions, and it's okay if it's a little bit of a rocky road and sometimes you don't have the answers or we don't have the answers. We all want the same thing, and that's just a safe place for queer people.
Hmm. That's
And I
really
think
wonderful.
really, truly, the most important thing is just to listen.
Yeah.
You just listen without judgment and be ready to deconstruct ideas that you've been taught. Get ready to unlearn some stuff that is not necessarily helpful and possibly harmful. As well as just like, if you're so worried about being a good person, you're going to not have as much space to uh, move through the world in a kind and compassionate way. And
Or
so,
to grow,
yeah, or to grow. So maybe
because
stop
you will get
worrying
stuff
about
wrong.
trying to be a good person because mistakes happen and people mess up. We're all human. Um,
There
so
is
just
no
just
perfect
listen.
ally.
Yeah, you just
There's no
listen
perfect
and you just.
ally. Sorry, we're both tired.
But we're saying the same thing. Like
We are.
Yeah.
Yeah, like don't be like you will mess up. We will mess up. Everyone will mess up. That's okay. You will learn and you will grow. And again, there might not be like a single answer to the question you have, and that's okay.
Mhm. That's wonderful. And what I'm hearing from that too is, I mean, it turns out that both questions that I asked overlap in the answer of like listening to the podcast, because it to your podcast, because what I'm gathering is like, even though maybe the target audience for the podcast might be queer youth and like building, again, like community and solidarity and validation and support in the queer community, but someone else listening, as you have pointed out, as you both have, would gather like this much more enriched and deep,
Mhm.
and complex and nuanced understanding of the whole landscape of what it feels like to step into lots and lots and lots of different people's shoes. And that way, as you said, like no one person is having to explain it 1,000 times. That's kind of the
Yeah.
whole point of writing a book. One of the points of writing a book and putting it out there, or doing an episode and talking in a microphone that hits a lot of people at the same time, is then you don't have to explain it for each individual
Mhm.
person. So yeah. So
Exactly.
thank you. Thank you so much for the work that you're both doing. I am so impressed with both of you and so grateful. I learned so much from you today, and I'm just really, really excited about what you're doing, and wish you both
Thank
the
you.
best. Thank you,
Thank
Frankie and
you.
Alex, for being here.
Thank you for
Thank you
giving us
for
this
having us.
space and
No,
asking like some really
seriously.
fun questions. I
Absolutely.
just
And
love
I'm
digging
sure,
into this.
yeah, I'm sure, Alex, you feel the same. We could talk about this stuff unending. Like, this could go on forever. So thank you for giving us the space to talk about it even more, because apparently one podcast wasn't enough.
Yeah. Yeah, really. Thank you so much. I hope that this resonates with people, whether they're in that first group or that second group or a whole other group. I just hope that like people come away with from this feeling better in some way or another.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
I second that.
You're not
Okay.
alone. You're doing great, and we love you.
Oh, I love it.